January 10th marks the birth of Lyle Menendez, the older brother in one of the most infamous family crime cases in American history. In this episode of Grimy Dates, we anchor the Menendez brothers' story to the day it all began. Long before courtrooms, headlines, and life sentences, there was a newborn baby, hopeful parents, and a future that looked full of promise. From Jose and Kitty Menendez welcoming their first child, to the pressures inside a Beverly Hills mansion, to the events that shocked the nation, this video walks through the Menendez case by the calendar, examining how a family that appeared perfect unraveled behind closed doors. This is not just a retelling of a case, it's a story about beginnings, expectations, and how January 10th became tied to a legacy still debated decades later. Welcome to Grimy Dates, where history doesn't just happen, it has a date. January 10th, 1968. For Jose and Kitty Menendez, this wasn't just another winter day in New York City. This was a beginning. Jose Menendez was a driven young executive and a Cuban immigrant who had clawed his way into the American corporate world. Ambitious, focused, determined to build a life that proved success was possible and permanent. Becoming a father mattered to him. Friends would later say Jose was proud, energized. A son felt like proof that his sacrifices meant something, that the future was solid, controlled, on track. And Kitty, by many accounts, was excited too. A baby meant purpose, a family, a chance to create something stable and loving. Photos from that time show a smiling couple holding their first child, stepping into parenthood with optimism. There was talk of dreams, of success, of raising a family that reflected the life they were building together. 2 years later, when another baby was on the way, that excitement returned. In November of 1970, Eric Menendez was born. Another son, another chance, a growing family in a country that had already given Jose more than he ever imagined. From the outside, it looked perfect. 2 parents, 2 sons, a future that felt wide open. No one could have known how completely that hope would unravel. As the boys grew, expectations grew with them. Jose demanded excellence, straight A's, athletic dominance, absolute obedience. Failure wasn't just disappointing, it was unacceptable. Affection, according to later testimony, came with conditions. Approval had to be earned. Fear became a tool of control. Kitty, meanwhile, struggled behind the scenes: depression, isolation, emotional instability. The family image mattered more than addressing what was happening inside the home. They eventually relocated to Beverly Hills, where image was everything. A massive mansion, tennis courts, luxury vehicles, private schools. To outsiders, the Menendez family represented success. Inside the house, the pressure never stopped. By the late 1980s, Lyle and Eric were young adults, but still deeply tied to their parents financially and emotionally. Lyle attended Princeton, but his time there ended abruptly after academic issues and disciplinary trouble. Eric struggled in school as well, eventually failing out of college. To Jose, these weren't setbacks, they were failures. According to the brothers, the household became increasingly volatile. Control tightened, arguments escalated, fear lingered. By the summer of 1989, the situation inside the home was reaching a breaking point. Then came August 20th, 1989. That night, Jose and Kitty Menendez were in the family room of their Beverly Hills home watching television. What happened next would shock the nation. Both parents lost their lives in a violent attack. The scene was chaotic, severe, unimaginable. Lyle and Eric called 911, distraught and hysterical, telling police they had just arrived home and discovered their parents. At first, investigators had no clear suspects. No forced entry, no robbery, no obvious motive. 2 sons, now orphans, stood to inherit millions. In the months that followed, public attention intensified. The brothers began spending heavily: luxury cars, designer clothes, watches, travel. To law enforcement, the spending raised concerns. To the media, it shaped a narrative. Privileged sons living freely after tragedy. Behind the scenes, investigators were building a case. The turning point came when Eric confided in his therapist, a confession that would eventually reach authorities. In March 1990, both brothers were arrested. The accusation was clear. They acted together. No one brother alone, both of them. The trials that followed captivated the country. In 1993, the first trials began, with Lyle and Eric tried separately but at the same time. What emerged stunned the public. The defense introduced allegations of long-term mistreatment within the home, claims describing extreme control, intimidation, and emotional instability behind closed doors. The brothers said they lived in constant fear. That confrontation felt inevitable. That night of August 20th was driven by desperation, not greed. The prosecution rejected that narrative. They argued the motive was money, inheritance, planning. The trials ended with hung juries. No verdict. America was split down the middle. A second trial began in 1995. This time, the court limited how much of the family history testimony jurors could hear. The focus shifted to behavior, preparation, aftermath. In 1996, the verdict came in. Both brothers were found guilty. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lyle was 28, Eric was 25. Even after Judge Weisberg handed down life without parole in 1996, Lyle and Eric Menendez didn't stop fighting legally. Over the next decade, the brothers filed multiple appeals challenging their convictions and seeking new review. Every court, from the California appellate courts to the Ninth Circuit Federal Appeals Court, rejected their claims through the early 2000s. Those petitions argued procedural issues and later included new evidence tied to alleged abuse that wasn't fully presented at trial, but none succeeded for years. For decades, the case mostly faded from daily headlines, but it never fully left the public imagination. As society's understanding of childhood trauma and abuse evolved, and with documentaries and scripted series introducing a new generation to the case, some relatives and advocates began publicly calling for resentencing or release. They argued that long-term incarceration without parole did not account for new evidence and the brothers' rehabilitation. In late 2024 and into 2025, that pressure took shape in court. Los Angeles County officials reviewed petitions filed by the Menendez legal team. They recommended the brothers be resentenced under California law because they were both under 26 when the loss of life occurred. In May 2025, a California judge agreed, resentencing both Lyle and Eric to 50 years to life with the possibility of parole. It was a dramatic legal shift that immediately made them eligible to appear before a parole board. That eligibility brought the next phase of the story. Throughout mid to late 2025, each brother sat for separate parole hearings before the California Board of Parole. Despite arguments from defense attorneys and support from some family members that the brothers have rehabilitated and should be considered for release, both Eric and Lyle were denied parole at their first hearings. They will not be freed yet, with the board citing factors like past rule violations and behavior in custody. The parole decisions aren't the end. Each can return before the board again in a few years, and clemency remains a possibility with the governor's review. What was once a life without parole sentence is now an active parole process that keeps the decades-old case alive in the courts and in public debate. So why January 10th? Because before the trials, before the mansion, before the headlines, there was a birth. A hopeful moment, a family that believed they were building something lasting, a future that on that winter day in 1968 still looked bright. January 10th reminds us that every story starts somewhere, and sometimes the beginning makes the ending even harder to understand. Thank you for journeying down this darker path on Grimy Dates. If you want more stories buried beneath the glitter of history, subscribe, comment, and let me know which forgotten truth you want uncovered next. Until then, remember that sometimes the brightest stories cast the darkest shadows, and here on Grimy Dates, we're not afraid to step into them.